De igual forma saludo, le digo buen día a todos los presentes y a quienes nos acompañan a través de la transmisión en la página de la universidad en Facebook. Bueno, el día de hoy la Universidad Regional del Sureste, en coordinación con la Facultad de Idiomas, nos tienen una presentación del doctor Roberto Criollo. Esta presentación se titula Bilingualism Matters, l'importance d'être bilingue. Hablando un poco del doctor Roberto Criollo, él es un profesor titular de tiempo completo e investigador en la Benemérita Universidad Autónoma de Puebla, en México. Candidato a doctor en lingüística y maestro TESOL y lingüística aplicada por la Universidad de Columbia, bajo el programa Fulbright. Asimismo, sostiene el Diplôme supérieur d'études françaises modernes de la Universidad Sorbonne de París. Ha enseñado los idiomas inglés y francés en diferentes institutos y contextos y presentado diversos artículos en eventos nacionales e internacionales. Sus publicaciones incluyen numerosos libros y ha dirigido cerca de 100 tesis de licenciatura y maestría en TESOL y lingüística aplicada. En fechas recientes fue el director del Departamento de Idiomas de la UAP. Bueno, antes de comenzar, se les recuerda, como medida preventiva, aquí tenemos las indicaciones de protección civil. Recomendamos a los asistentes ubicar las salidas de emergencia y rutas de evacuación, así como seguir las indicaciones en caso de sismo o incendio. Mantener la calma y seguir las indicaciones del personal de la Universidad Regional del Sureste. Este espacio cuenta con 4 salidas de emergencia a los extremos del auditorio. Recuerde que si tiene que evacuar el inmueble, debe de hacerlo en orden, sin correr, empujarse y circular por la derecha. Seguir en todo momento las indicaciones del personal capacitado y bueno, esperemos que no sea necesario. No sé si ya está listo nuestro presentador, nuestro invitado especial. Sí, bueno, sin más que agregar, entonces vayamos a la plática.
Buenas tardes a todos y muchas gracias por la invitación. No pregunté, la presentación es en inglés y hay y mis visuales están en español, entonces podemos comenzar cuando ustedes digan. Okay, thanks again for the invitation. And today we're going to be talking about bilingualism and why it is important. Could we go to the next one, please? Now, the first thing that we can do, obviously, is that bilingualism is very important in the world because there's a growing interest for learning other languages because of globalization. And obviously, everybody knows that this is an advantage at both personal and professional levels. And when we talk about the world population, we can see that over 50% of the world population is bilingual. And this is surprising because normally we don't think that bilingualism is so common. Next one, please. So this is the map developed by the Dying Languages Project, and it shows the language hotspots. So every color point that you see on the map represents a language. And we can see that there's a great language diversity. There are over 7,000 languages in the world, and obviously some of them are disappearing. But what this map shows us is also, the interaction that exists between different languages. We can see that there's a great number of zones in the map that have different colors, and they represent languages that are in contact. And obviously this creates bilingualism. Next one, please. Now, these are some statistics in Europe developed by the European Commission, and we can see the level of bilingualism in Europe. This is not surprising because we know that in Europe there are lots of languages and they're in contact. So we can see that in the European Union, at least 54% of the population speak an additional language, but also there's like over 15% who speaks at least two at least two additional languages, so they're trilingual. And in different countries, there are different levels of bilingualism, but as you can see, this is something that is very important for Europeans to speak different languages so that they communicate, exchange, like science and do business with other members of the community. Next one, please. And this is the map of the 2017 census in the United States. Normally, we think that a great number of the American population are monolingual, but in fact, this is changing a lot. We can see that about 34% of the world of the American people, they speak an additional language at home. So we're not saying that they learn it. We're saying that they use a non-English language at home. So there are some regions that are more bilingual, like we can see here, New York, for example, New Jersey, Texas, and so on. So in the United States, this is also a very important phenomenon. We cannot deny that there are a lot of people in the United States that are bilingual. Next one, please. Now, and something important about the English language is obviously that it is a global language today. So there are about 1.5 billion people who speak English in the world, but most of them, about 2/3 of them, speak this language as a second or a foreign language. So this means that 2/3 of the people who speak English speak it as an additional language. So this means that all of these people are obviously bilingual, and only 1/3 of them are native speakers of the language. So it's a language that is global, and obviously it creates bilingualism because a lot of people like us want to study English. Next one, please. Now, and Mexico is not the exception. Mexico is a country with a great linguistic diversity. Obviously, the problem that we can see is that lots of languages are disappearing in our country, and this is very sad, obviously, because in the end, maybe we'll have just one language, like the official language will be Spanish. Right now, there is not an official language. Like all of the national languages, like Nahuatl, Otomi, etc., they have a status as languages in the same way as Spanish. But as a matter of fact, we know that Spanish is used for most purposes, and then the national languages are normally not very used in different fields. But still, we can see here that a great number of the population of the people who speak a native language, an original language, a national language, they also speak Spanish. And so this creates also a great number of bilinguals in our country. Next one, please. It's over 10 million people. Now, let's talk very quickly just about, what we understand by bilingualism and the different kinds of bilingualism that there are. Next one, please. So basically, a very simple definition is that a bilingual person is a person who can use more than one language, on an everyday basis. Okay. And it's a very simple definition. And this includes, obviously, people who speak more than two languages. And this obviously includes people who are in very elementary levels of an additional language. Next one, please. Now, so there are different dimensions, by which we can explain bilingualism. So it can be a phenomenon that is individual. That means that people can be bilingual in a community that is monolingual, or it can be social bilingualism. This means that whole communities could use more than one language for different purposes. Another dimension is the relationship that exists between the two languages, the functions that each language has, the levels of proficiency that you attain in the language. If you use it productively, that means to speak, to write, to interact, or if you just understand it. And finally, the age and kind of acquisition. So each of these 6 dimensions are going to give us different kinds of bilingualism. Let's look at them. Next one, please. So then the first classification is between social and individual bilingualism. So we say um, that people here in Mexico who study English or French or another foreign language, we call this an individual bilingualism because we learn the language only to use it individually by ourselves, but there is not a community that uses, like English or French that we belong to. It's just for us. And obviously, there are communities in which 2 languages are used. And this social bilingualism is called diglossia, and it happens like in many communities where there is more than one official language. We can see it obviously in places with a high linguistic diversity. The whole community uses more than one language, so bilingual or social bilingualism. Next one, please. Now, the second kind of bilingualism that we're going to see is also dependent on social bilingualism. Now, we know that there is a relationship of power between the languages. That means that, for example, here in Mexico, Spanish is the dominant language. So we use Spanish for all of the official purposes. If you want to do something important, you do it in Spanish. And therefore, Spanish and all of the national languages, they don't have the same status. So people want to learn Spanish, and not many people want to learn a national language. So this causes subtractive bilingualism, and we're going to see what it is. Could we go to the next one, please? Thanks. So this image shows the process of additive and subtractive bilingualism. In the first case, we can see that we speak a first language, and then we start learning an additional language or language B. So language 1 is the first language B is the second language. And then we progress learning the language, and finally we become proficient in both languages. This is when you learn a language that is prestigious. Like if you learn English, for example, if you want to study French or German or Italian, you normally don't forget your first language because you only want to use the additional language for different other purposes, but you keep your first language. In the cases of subtractive bilingualism, we have a first language that is developed, right? We have the other language that we're learning, and in this case, we can talk about, children of Mexican immigrants in the United States, or people here in Mexico whose children in Mexico whose families, speak a national language like Nahuatl. So then they learn the prestigious language, which could be here in Mexico Spanish or in the United States English, and they develop more proficiency. But eventually, the proficiency in the prestigious language, in the second language, the new language, the national language, the powerful language, is going to be more important. And at some point, the first language is going to be forgotten. This means that a lot of children in the United States who had Mexican parents end up speaking like only English or mostly English, and they will probably forget their first language. This happens also here in Mexico. Little children who come from different ethnias, different ethnic groups, they will probably forget their language at some point because they will be using mostly Spanish. Next one, please. And also, this can happen across generations. So this means that a person who arrives in a new country, first generation, a Mexican child in the United States, the parents, they speak only Spanish. And then they have children, and then they can speak English and Spanish. But then later, the children of these people will probably only speak the prestigious language, in this case, English. So this means that generation by generation, one of the languages could be lost, and this is what's happening here in Mexico. We said a lot of our original languages, a lot of our national languages are bound to disappear because children are no longer learning them. They are just learning Spanish, and this is a very sad situation. So this is subtractive bilingualism. Next one, please. And also, depending on the level of bilingualism and the context of use, we can have passive bilingualism, where a person speaks only one language but can understand another language. Insipid bilingualism is the one in which there is limited proficiency in one language. So this means when you are starting to learn a new language, you don't know a lot. This is insipid bilingualism, when you start just learning a language. Then there is subordinate bilingualism, in which you speak two languages, but one of them is dominant. In other words, you have a higher level of proficiency in in one language and limited proficiency in another one. So this is when you are an intermediate learner, for example. And finally, you can become bilingual and become a coordinate bilingualism. In this case, you have developed proficiency in both languages, but you don't use them in the same way. One example could be those people who learn English here in Mexico. Okay, so I speak Spanish, then I study English. I become proficient in English. I have a really good level. I can say anything in English, but I'm not going to use English in my personal life, for example. In my case, I studied English. I use English for my work. I am an English teacher. I teach different courses that are in English. But when I get out of the school, I use mostly Spanish. So in this case, this means that I am going to use the one of the languages for one context. English is for professional uses, and Spanish is for personal social use. So you can see a distinction between where and how you use the two languages. You don't do the same things with both languages, and that is called coordinate bilingualism. Now, finally, a situation in which you use both languages for all of the purposes and that you're fully proficient in both languages, that is called compound bilingualism. This will be the case of a person who speaks both languages and uses them at home and uses them at work and uses them for different purposes. So it's a perfect balance of bilingualism. It's very difficult to achieve, obviously, because of natural limitations of time and different limitations of the uses to which you can put the language to. Okay, so um, but this is what we call like the ideal level of bilingualism. Combined bilingualism means that you can use both languages at the same level of proficiency for all of the same purposes. You're completely bilingual, so to speak. Next one, please. And then, depending on the age and the way in which you acquire the languages, we can have different kinds of bilingualism. First one is bilingual acquisition or native bilingualism. This happens when a child learns two languages from birth. That means people who are raised bilingual from an early childhood. Then we have simultaneous bilingualism. It's when you learn two languages at the same time, but not necessarily from birth. Okay, so it could be a little bit later. Then we have consecutive bilingualism. This is what most people have. You have one language and then you acquire another language, one after the other. So it's consecutive. Then we have second language acquisition, the process that happens when a child that already speaks one language is brought to a context where a second language is used. So because the person is very young, he or she is going through a process of acquisition of a second language. It's not learning, but it's acquisition. And then we have situations in which we can acquire a second language. This happens in a school in a context where the language is not spoken, but it happens when you make the learning process very similar to the one that children have. We usually call this instructed second language acquisition. This means that it is in school, it is in a classroom, but you use the same kind of processes that are used when children learn, when they acquire their first language. So adapting the mode of acquisition to a classroom to make it more real life like. And finally, the last way is um, foreign language learning, in which you study the language, you learn it in a classroom by studying it formally with grammar rules, with explanations, sometimes with translations. And obviously, um, this is the case in which, you know, it becomes more difficult to be bilingual. The easiest one is to learn to acquire two languages from the moment that you're born, but it's not very common. It exists. In my case, for example, I am married to a French person, and we have two children, and both of them are trilingual. So this means that they learn from the moment that they were born English and French. We spoke to them in English and in French. We interacted with them, and they developed the three languages at the same time. Next one, please. Now let's talk about the benefits of bilingualism. So you're studying languages, and there are some obvious advantages of being bilingual. We're going to look at some of them, the most important ones. Next one, please. So first of all, there are economic benefits, because if you speak more than one language, you can have better job opportunities and higher salaries. Here is some information about that was obtained in different countries: the United States, Spain, and in the European Union. All of these surveys found that bilingual people have better jobs and they are better paid than monolingual people. Another thing is that you have opportunities for academic mobility and scholarships. And obviously here in Mexico, we have, the scholarships that are given by Comexos, Comisión México Estados Unidos. So you can go study, a master's or a doctorate in the United States. They pay you to do that. You can also do some some teaching, or participate in this identity and leadership community meetings that are organized by Comexus. So in other words, if you speak more than one language, you can go and study in another country and get a scholarship for that. And finally, obviously, you have more options of personal and professional development. Next one, please. Now, concerning the potential that you have to communicate, this is something that is very important. You can see that if you speak only Spanish, you can communicate in 31 countries. But if you learn French, you can communicate with people in 54 other countries. And finally, if you learn English, you can communicate in 137 more countries. So for a person who is trilingual, in English and Spanish and French can communicate in 222 countries. So, and this is just opens up a potential for personal and professional development. Next one, please. In the same way, when you talk about the number of speakers, we can see here the numbers of speakers of Spanish, over 500 million people. This is the number of people in the world who speak French. It's almost 280 million, 1 billion for English. And so if you are trilingual in Spanish, English, and French, you can communicate with over 2 billion people in the world. and that is a huge amount of the world population. There must be about 11, 12 billion people in the world, and so you can communicate with a great percentage of the world population by learning just two additional languages. Next one, please. Now, learning languages is also good for the brain, okay? Because when you become bilingual, there's like a deep change in the general structures and cognitive functions of your brain. And most notably, there's a particular effect of bilingualism on a part of the brain that is called the corpus callosum and also on the front lobe. We can see that the corpus callosum of the bilingual brain is larger in area than that of monolingual people. Next one, please. Let's look at what the corpus callosum is. So the corpus callosum is basically made by axons. Okay, so the axons are the neural connections that allow, for neuron communication to happen. So they're like the links between one neuron and the other, and this part is larger in bilingual people. Next one, please. So here in this image, we can see the front lobe, that is the part of the brain that is stimulated also by bilingualism. People who are bilingual have greater abilities to use the executive functions of the brain. So this means that bilingualism is going to have a positive effect on everything that is the executive function of the brain. This means, obviously, voluntary movement, inhibitory control, focus and attention, problem resolution, social interaction, and all of these things that are very important for people to develop cognitively and professionally. The front lobe is the part of the brain that is most used for important cognitive and learning processes. Next one, please. So, why is executive function important? It is important because sometimes people think that when you speak two languages, you have like a switch in your brain and then you turn it in one way or the other to speak English. It's like, I'm going to change to English, and then you turn on English. You speak only English. And then you say Spanish, and then you turn on Spanish and you speak only Spanish. But this is not the case, okay? We don't have like a switch to use one language or the other. When we speak a language right now, for example, I'm speaking English. I have some visuals that are in Spanish. And basically what is happening over there is that both languages are activated at the same time. So this is a functional magnetic resonance image of a monolingual brain activity. So we can see here that when the person is using the language, the sounds of the language, the Broca and Wernicke sound, get activated by linguistic performance. Okay, so let's see what happens with the monolingual brain. Could we go to the next one? Yes, this is. So when a bilingual person is using the language, we can see that both of the languages that the person speaks, or all of the languages that the person speaks, get activated at the same time. So this means that right now I am using English, but all of the zones of the brain in which Spanish is stored are being activated at the same time. So this means that the languages are in constant competition. And sometimes that's why we make mistakes, and that's why sometimes we have slips or we say funny things, because we are selecting what language is going to be produced, but all of the information of the other language is also over there. It's active so that we can use it at a particular moment. Okay, so and that's this is very interesting because it shows you that it's not just one language or the other. It's both of them are there. They are available for you, and there it's difficult sometimes to manage them. Okay, and all obviously to manage this we need an increased executive function. Next one, please. Now, some of the experiments that have been used to measure, the effects of bilingualism and on the brain have used this kind of pictures. So it's easier for bilingual people to distinguish both pictures in each image. So that means, for example, here you can see a young person or an old person in the picture on the top right side, and then the picture in the at the top in the middle, you can see a dog or you can see a bunny. It's easier for bilingual people to see both sides of the pictures. They do it faster, they do it more effectively. This has been done in laboratory tests, and they show why executive function is at play in the bilingual brain. Next picture, please. Yeah, this is the same thing. It's very similar. The Stroop effect. It's easier for bilingual people to focus on one of the two competing stimuli. Here you see we have the word amarillo is in green, the word azul is in red, the word orange is in blue. So we have colors and we have words that do not match. And it's easier for a bilingual person to focus just on the color of the words or on the words themselves. Um, in all of the laboratory tests that they have done, they have found that this kind of task is easier for bilingual people. They can focus on one thing. They can just say verde, rojo, azul, amarillo, azul, naranja, and they don't care if the word is and the color, if the color and the word do not match. And so this is something, maybe you will try this one a little bit later, but this is some of the experiments in which it has been demonstrated that the bilingual brain is more effective for this kind of tasks. Next one, please. So then we can just summarize the benefits, the cognitive benefits of bilingualism in terms of long-term memory. We have better long-term memory, both episodic about events and both semantic about concepts. We also have better working memory, the memory that you need to perform mathematical operations, for example, and the short-term memory, because we need to work with greater amounts of information. A bilingual person needs to be constantly monitoring two languages, and that's why it's more effective. Obviously, mathematical problem resolution, it has been found that people who are bilingual have better math skills than people who are not bilingual. Obviously, you need to practice, you need to do it, but it's easier for a bilingual person to become better at math. Next one, please. And obviously, this multitasking thing, so doing several things at the same time correctly is easier for bilingual people. Okay, and we have found that obviously the abilities that you have in one language can be transferred to another language. So this means a person who is good at writing in the first language can become a good writer in a second language. You transfer your skills from one language to the other. Another important thing is obviously code switching or translanguaging. Bilingual people can flexibly and effectively switch from one language to the other. I mean, there could be some little problems, but we're just constantly changing from one language to the other, and it becomes easier the more you do it. Another thing is meta-linguistic awareness, that we can compare the languages. We can be more precise at the moment of communicating, because obviously bilingual people are constantly comparing and contrasting the languages to find similarities and differences. So it's these are some of the most important positive effects of bilingualism on cognition. Next one, please. And something that is very important for our health is that bilingual people, bilingual people's brain can keep healthy for a longer time. This means that a bilingual person can see a delay of senile dementia by almost 3.9 years. So this means that we the bilingual brain keeps active for a longer time. It doesn't deteriorate as fast as a monolingual language. And also, um, learning another language and using it even after infancy can have very important dynamic effects on the white matter of the brain. So this means that bilingualism protects your brain from Alzheimer. It protects your brain from any kind of a mental disease. Obviously, there are particular cases in which it's impossible for it to protect, but the bilingual brain, being more, it's more has more plasticity, and therefore can be healthy for a longer time because the bilingual person is always using two languages, and the brain is constantly being used. All of the neural circuits get constantly get constant feedback, and obviously there's more protection. Next one. And obviously, a bilingual person has the advantage of intercultural competence. This means that a language comes with a culture. When you learn another language, you become more aware of your identity, and then you become more aware of the identity of the people who speak the other language. So you develop a wider perspective of the world. You become more empathetic towards other people. You become more open-minded too, right? Because when you learn another language, you become more interested in your own culture and then in the new culture. And finally, a bilingual person can develop a great ability to mediate, to be interculturally competent, and to be, in general, more empathetic towards other people, towards the differences, than a regular person. Next one, please. And finally, obviously, for some reason, some studies, like the ones that I'm showing, the Lazaruk and Lang, they show that also, because learning a language is a process that can be very frustrating, very difficult, very challenging. It's never ending. You always keep learning. Like I've been studying English and using English for a long time, and I'm still learning it. There are some things that I don't know, and I wish I knew. And then every day I'm just finding out how limited I am in English. And so, for that reason, these kind of frustrations or limitations that we have make bilingual people more flexible. You become more flexible, more tolerant, and obviously, this contributes also to happiness. So, this means that bilingual people can also be happier than regular people because you're constantly used to difficult things, to complicated things, to effort and frustration. Okay, and that's a very important thing. So learning a language is going to help you a more patient person. It's going to help you a more adaptable person, so to speak. And finally, obviously, another advantage of bilingualism that is very very interesting too is that you can read books and you can watch movies in the original version without subtitles and enjoy all of the content. Be the first person who laughs, when there's a joke, right? The bilingual person laughs first, and then the other people, after they read the subtitles, they can laugh too. So this is a very important advantage, enjoying the art in the original version. And obviously, bilingual people travel more. They have more friends of different parts of the world, and sometimes they can even find romance and a partner in another country. Like I said, in my case, well, I'm a Mexican. I was in the United States. I also went to France. My wife is I married a French woman, and now we have a home in which we speak the three languages: English, Spanish, and French. So it brings a lot of things into your life, and bilingualism is a very, very important competence that we need to develop, and that we need also help our children develop. I think if you want to do something good for your children, like, you should make them bilingual. That's going to help them a lot in life. Next, please. And so that's what I used to say. I'm bilingual. What is your superpower? Okay, bilingualism is really something that provides a lot of benefits for people and societies in general. And thanks a lot for your attention. This is then some things that I wanted to say. I'm sorry I went probably a little too fast, but I'm ready in case you have some questions, and we can just develop a little conversation about some of the things that I said.
Bilingualismo. Entonces, ahora vamos a pasar. Sí, aplausos, aplausos. Muy interesante. Bueno, ahora vamos a tener una sesión de 15 minutos en donde van a poder exponer sus preguntas. Bueno, pueden también hacer uso de su bilingüismo, ¿no? Pueden hacerlo en español, en inglés, en francés. No pasa nada.
Cualquiera de esos tres idiomas está bien.
De igual manera, en Facebook, las personas que nos están viendo pueden expresar sus preguntas, pueden escribirlas, y el doctor va a responderlas muy amablemente. ¿Tenemos por ahí alguna pregunta en Facebook? Ok, perfecto. Muy bien, muy bien. Bueno, supongo que la información proporcionada fue bastante útil, muy clara, y le agradecemos reiteradamente al el doctor Roberto por su participación. De igual manera, disculpe, interrupción. Tenemos una pregunta.
Buenos días, disculpe, pero ¿usted cuál lengua considera que es más difícil de aprender? De las que usted sabe hablar, claro.
Ok, so es una pregunta muy común. Si quiere podemos hacerlo en español. Es una pregunta muy común, y para mí lo que siempre contesto es: la lengua más difícil de aprender es la que no hablas. Y esto obviamente quiere decir que no hay una lengua que sea más fácil que la otra. Para mí, por ejemplo, si hablamos del inglés, el inglés, a pesar de que gramaticalmente es más fácil, no hay conjugaciones, los tiempos son relativamente simples para producir, es un idioma con muchísimo vocabulario y con algunos elementos que no existen en otros idiomas, como los phrasal verbs o multi-word verbs, que son bastante complejos. El sistema de preposiciones es bastante complejo también, y después de tantos años estudiándolo, pues sigo cometiendo errores con preposiciones, a veces con artículos, o los phrasal verbs, nunca me los acabo de aprender, ¿no? Porque son muchísimos y cada vez salen más. O sea, es un idioma bastante productivo, que tiene también influencias de otros idiomas, como del latín, del francés, del español, y es un idioma bastante rico en términos de vocabulario. Y entonces por eso digo, el inglés, si es difícil, es por eso. Ahora, el francés parece más fácil, y si hablamos de comprensión de lectura, creo que la gente puede entender fácilmente en francés con algunas pequeñas nociones, porque se parece mucho al español. Pero la diferencia es que el francés tiene 14 vocales, 14 sonidos vocales, mientras que el inglés tiene 5 y y el inglés, dependiendo del dialecto que se hable, porque hay algunos en que hay sonidos diferentes, pero también en términos de vocales es mucho más simple. Entonces son 14 sonidos vocales del francés y eso hace que la pronunciación sea más difícil. Y hablamos de las conjugaciones también, porque el francés, al igual que el español, se conjuga en todos los tiempos y en todas las personas, y eso lo hace también bastante complejo. Y podemos decir exactamente lo mismo del español. Entonces, en conclusión, para mí no hay una lengua que sea más fácil de aprender de otra. La lengua más fácil es tu lengua materna y la lengua más difícil es la lengua que no hablas. Entonces, cualquier idioma que no hables, ese va a ser el más difícil para ti.
Muy bien, muchas gracias, doctor. Tenemos otra pregunta por aquí.
Hola, buenas tardes. Bueno, yo quisiera saber si usted considera que el inglés es la lengua más importante del mundo y por qué.
Perdón, no escuché bien el final de la pregunta.
Disculpe, lo vuelvo a repetir. ¿Usted considera que la lengua más hablada y más importante del mundo es el inglés?
Ahora, eso es un tema muy importante y obviamente que es muy controversial en términos de lo que comprendemos en el campo de la sociolingüística. Lo que te puedo decir es que es un idioma dominante, es un idioma global, no es solamente una lengua internacional, sino ya se considera el inglés una lengua global, por el número de hablantes que hay, que ya van a llegar próximamente a 2 billones de personas. Y eso con los cálculos inexactos que existen, obviamente. Pero esto no quiere decir que sea una lengua importante. Hay que tomar en cuenta que cada lengua va a reflejar toda una cultura, una cosmovisión que es muy importante para los hablantes de esa lengua. Realmente lo triste en el mundo de hoy es que hay muchos idiomas que están desapareciendo y en el curso de los próximos 20 años, más de la mitad de los idiomas que existen ahorita van a desaparecer. Aquí en México hay varios idiomas, pueden entrar a este sitio, eh, proyecto de lenguas en Endangered Languages Project. Endangered Languages Project, y ahí van a ver, hay idiomas acá en México, y les digo idiomas, recuerden, porque cada sistema lingüístico diferenciado es un idioma. A veces dicen, no, es que son los dialectos. No, un dialecto es una variante de un idioma. Todos nuestros idiomas nacionales están en peligro de desaparecer, todos. Y hay unos en donde ya solamente hay 5 hablantes, hay 3 hablantes, hay un hablante, y cuando esas personas mueran, el idioma va a morir, el idioma que hablaban y esta riqueza cultural y lingüística va a desaparecer para siempre. Entonces, eh, el inglés es un idioma dominante, pero no es una lengua que sea más importante que otras. Todas las lenguas son importantes para la riqueza cultural del mundo. Cada vez que un idioma muere, desaparece, se extingue a causa de la muerte de sus hablantes, es una tragedia para toda la humanidad porque cada lengua expresa cosas diferentes. Hay cosas que podemos expresar en inglés que son difíciles de expresar en español. Y hay cosas que expresamos en español, palabras con un contenido tan preciso y tan rico que por más que las traduzcamos no lo vamos a poder decir igual en inglés o en francés. Entonces, en lo que se tiene que trabajar y que desafortunadamente los gobiernos de todos los países, incluyendo el nuestro, no lo hacen, es en hacer que estas lenguas, estas otras lenguas, desarrollen, que tengan las mismas oportunidades, utilizándolas en la ciencia, utilizándolas en las artes, trayéndolas realmente a las escuelas como lenguas que se usan para objetivos sociales y académicos. Estamos marginando nuestras propias lenguas nacionales a simplemente el uso cotidiano en la familia, en la casa, y por eso van a desaparecer en algún momento. Yo creo que algo importante que hay que hacer es enriquecer nuestro repertorio lingüístico y de acuerdo a estas sugerencias ideales de la UNESCO, es que un ciudadano del mundo, o sea, si quieren realmente ser un ciudadano del mundo, además de su lengua materna, tendríamos que hablar una lengua de proximidad, es decir, una lengua que se hable cerca de la comunidad en donde estamos. Y aparte de una lengua de vecindad, también hablar una lengua internacional. Es decir, que todos nosotros como mexicanos deberíamos hablar por lo menos el español, una lengua de nuestra región, la que se hable en la comunidad en la que estamos, la más próxima, y ya después, al final, una lengua extranjera también. Esto se está perdiendo. El rol del inglés como lengua global ha desarrollado el bilingüismo, porque es lo que les decía, el inglés se habla mucho más como lengua extranjera o como segunda lengua que como lengua materna. Es decir, que hay un mayor número de personas que la hablan, pero no son hablantes nativos del idioma. Entonces, si queremos hacer lo mismo con nuestros idiomas nacionales, tenemos que revitalizarlos, tenemos que darles usos importantes en la vida real, en la sociedad, en lo académico, en todos los ámbitos de la actividad humana para que puedan ser así. Es triste decirlo, pero sí es una realidad muy importante. O sea, hay que aprender el inglés. No es malo aprender el inglés y es muy bueno aprender el inglés, nos va a ayudar a desarrollarnos, pero también pensemos en aprender y en enseñar a nuestros hijos una lengua nacional y alguna otra lengua que se hable cerca de donde vivimos. Es lo que podría decir.
Bueno, una vez más, doctor Roberto, le hacemos extenso nuestro agradecimiento por participar en esta ponencia y queremos brindarle un reconocimiento por su participación como ponente en el marco del 5º Congreso Estudiantil de Investigación con el tema Bilingualism Matters, l'importance d'être bilingue, realizado los días 6 y 7 de octubre del 2022, mismo que le haremos llegar en físico, al mismo tiempo con un presente de parte de toda la Universidad Regional.
Muchas gracias.
Muchas gracias a todos por su presencia. Disculpen. Bueno, muchas gracias a todos por su presencia y muchas gracias al doctor Roberto.
Gracias.